episode of Fermented Adventure the Podcast is brought to you by Fermented Adventure. Dawn, we have merchandise.
Yes, we do.
How do people find our merchandise?
They need to go onto our website at fermentedadventure.com and click on the apparel tab.
So go to fermentedadventure.com and click on the apparel tab, and what will they find?
They will find our Fermented Adventure the Podcast shirt. May contain alcohol, and we have a couple specials that we just did. Cerveza Made Me Do It and Tequila Made Me Do It.
Now, this is perfect for spring break, Cinco de Mayo, or even the summer, and you'll look really cool, and you'll be able to say, hey, it wasn't me, it was tequila or cerveza that made me do it.
Yes, that's true.
We have different things. We have shirts, we have glasses. What are some of the other things we have in there? Women's stuff, men's stuff, tank tops?
Tanks, tees, sweatshirts, pullover hoodies, you name it.
You name it, we have it, and more to come, right?
More to come.
Fermentedadventure.com, click on the apparel tab, buy the merchandise. Cheers! Hello, ladies and gentlemen, craft spirit enthusiasts, and those interested in the intoxicating world of craft distilleries, cideries, meaderies, wineries, and the occasional foray into breweries. It's Rich Shane, and welcome to Fermented Adventure, the podcast, where we bring you the fascinating people that are making the mash, fermenting, distilling, bottling, pouring, and delivering to you some of the finest libations in the world. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items. Thank you for bringing the podcast into wherever you are and whatever you're doing. We truly are grateful that you have chosen to listen and make us part of your day. It would mean the world to us if you left a 5-star review. This helps us climb in the rankings, and it makes it easier for others to find us. Don't hesitate to leave us your comments as well. If the podcast didn't meet your expectations, tell us why. We're always striving to improve. You can find us at fermentedadventure.com. We are on Instagram and Facebook as Fermented Adventure. Email us at fermentedadventure@gmail.com. All right, FA Nation, let's meet our guest. He's Owen King. I'm Rich Shane. Dawn Ranieri's here, and this is Fermented Adventure, the podcast. Owen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We are at Iron Clad Distillery. We were here 3 years ago, and this is one of those distilleries where I said, I kick myself today for trying your amazing spirits, but we didn't go home with anything, and I have no idea why. But we're going to change that today. We're at Iron Clad Distilling. How did all this get started?
So, my dad bought the building we are currently in about 15 years ago. It was a dry goods warehouse built in 1913. And so he had another business operating out of here, and as busy as his other business ever was, he was never utilizing all 30,000 square feet of this building. So he and I were working together, so every day we would talk about how we can best utilize this space. And the one thing we kept coming back to was that bourbon barrels would take up a lot of space, and we could also, store them wherever we needed, and over time they would eventually make us money. And so one day...
So it really started with bourbon barrels,
yeah,
not distilling.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the whole thing. It was, we're like, we'll store bourbon barrels. But we bought it. So one day I walked into work. He's like, hey, by the way, I bought a still. And I was like, okay, great. We're bootleggers now. So, we didn't want to necessarily go to jail. So we went through, got all of our licenses and permits and everything to become a functioning distillery. So we started with one little 26-gallon still, thinking that'd be enough to make us market viable, make friends and family and just make enough for the state of Virginia. Didn't really have ideas of, going national or anything like that. We just wanted to kind of stay small. When we fired up that still, we quickly learned that one 26-gallon still makes about 2 gallons of bourbon a day. So to fill a 53-gallon barrel took us a month. That would never be market viable.
I can only imagine the conversations you and your dad, Stephen, are having. This is going to take a while.
Yeah, so we kind of didn't know exactly what we were getting ourselves into. And we knew I was always against kind of sourcing. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just I always thought it'd be kind of cool to only use Virginia grain and only sell whatever we make. And then we also didn't ever want to make anything besides bourbon, although we do have affinity for, vodka and some rums and stuff like that. So we were like, let's just focus on one thing and make bourbon. We're running with this one little 26-gallon still, trying to just get the hang of it, learning how to distill, which was kind of a good thing, at least having some knowledge about how to make this thing work. And one day we're like, all right, if we're going to get serious about this, we need to get a bigger still. So we bought 5 more stills now, just like that 26-gallon still. So now we had essentially 125-gallon still, thinking, okay, yeah, now we've got it. Now we were making 12.5 gallons a day. Still not even close to market viable. I mean, that's some smaller distilleries, what they throw away from the heads. So now we could fill a 53-gallon barrel in a week. So, okay, great. We're getting bigger. So now we're running this, and we go and talk to this other. We were talking to this other distillery out in the western part of the state, where they were kind of like the pilot house for this company called Affordable Distilling Equipment. That company's out of Missouri, and so we went to go talk to them about how the best way to what they think about these stills and how they work, and the stuff that's coming off them. How does it taste? And so we went out there and we tried it and we distilled with them for a couple days. And the guy said one thing that was really kind of the point where it was a turning point for us, where he said, you cannot make money in the distilling world with anything less than 250-gallon still. And so we're like, okay, well, we need to go back and we need to buy a 250-gallon still. And so then we're looking at the prices of a 250-gallon still. And my dad and I had this kind of same thought was, no one's ever going to want a smaller still. So let's go with the biggest we can possibly get. So we bought a 500-gallon still. That was about 3 years ago. And now we're doing a 53-gallon barrel a day, which is, from where we started to where we are now, a substantially greater thing for us because we're actually, that's about 53-gallon barrel a day is still small. That's what Jack Daniel's, Jim Beam are spilling in a day. But it gives us kind of the keys to our own destiny, where we can kind of build or scale up the way we want to scale up and control our own fate. And that's why we kind of like where we're at.
Talk about those origin years or that beginning inception. How did you settle in on a mash bill? I know you have a number of them and you're doing a lot of different things. What was the original idea for where you want to be? You said local, you're sourcing from Virginia grains.
Yeah.
Did that kind of dictate your mash bill, or how did that work for you?
So when I was in college, I took this one course, which was fortuitous, that it was a chemistry class. And during the chemistry class, we got to pick for a certain part of the semester what we wanted to learn about. And the whole class decided they wanted to learn about brewing/distilling. So that was the only kind of knowledge I had of distilling before we got into this. And during the class, I never thought I'd use it. I just thought it would be kind of cool to know how to do these things. And so when we were starting out, we reached out to the ag department in Richmond. And I wanted to find a farmer that could grow every single grain for us. And so we found one. The farmer, he's 45 minutes north here in Charles City. His name's Dave Hula. He's fantastic. He does everything we need him to do. And so I, went out there, met him, and said, I want to use only Virginia grains in my bourbon because I want to make sure that when we're making this, that we're really showing off Virginia agriculture because, distilling really all dates back to using what you had to make alcohol. And so that was kind of what I wanted to make sure we were continuing on. And I didn't think, sourcing anything from, although, I went to college in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I was like, oh my gosh, how cool would it be to bring down some corn from there? Because, obviously Pennsylvania has fantastic corn, but I was like, all right, I'll stick to my guns and I'm going to only use Virginia grains. So that was the kind of idea that I wanted to stick with. And so when I was picking a mash bill, I wanted to make sure I had the broadest scale of grains. So I wanted the 4-grain mash bill. And there was a formula that we knew worked for what percentage of each grain worked and had the best flavor. Also showcasing each grain in the spirit. So that's the reason we went with a 4-grain mash bill, which is 70% corn, 10% wheat, 10% rye, 10% malted barley. To make sure you got the spiciness of the rye, you got the sweetness of the corn and the wheat, and then you got that little, the balancing of malt in there to make sure it just comes together as a spirit.
Now, you talked about, you and Dad said we have this huge warehouse of a space. Were you bourbon drinkers at the time? You said this would be a great place to store barrels. And what year are we talking about at this point?
So this would have been late 2013 was when all this started. And then 2014 is when we got our permit to actually distill. We were big bourbon drinkers. So, we used to always joke that on Christmas, the bottom of our Christmas tree looked like a bottle exchange or a liquor store, more like it. Because we were all just trying to find the most rare bottles to give to each other. And so we all really love bourbon. We always joke that, one of my memories of my grandmother, which is my dad's mom, was sitting there on Christmas morning, and she'd be sitting there with Old Crow on the rocks with a splash of water, and like that, she'd just have that all day. And so we always joke that that was where we got our bourbon gene from. We believe everyone has a bourbon gene in them, and so our bourbon gene was passed down through her. And then we all began, when you turn 21, you start drinking bourbon, and then you kind of, you start, bourbon on the or bourbon and Coke, and then you kind of wean off the Coke, and then you go bourbon on the rocks, and then you wean off the rocks, and then you just go bourbon neat.
You just really wean off the glass.
Eventually get rid of the glass, straight out of the bottle, you're good to go. So we were always big bourbon drinkers. I mean, most of the conversations my dad and I were having, talking about storing barrels, was while we were sitting there sipping bourbon. And that was kind of where that idea came from.
I think it's so fun. And this is one of the things for Dawn and I that resonated so much. You being a family distillery. And really, everybody, you enjoy working together. You enjoy the experience together. Is that something that just... It was like, wow, this is actually, you knew that was going to work? Or was it kind of like, because I see it with you and Kara and your dad, and you guys love each other? You love being here together?
Well, the nice thing about working with your family is that no matter what, if you piss one of the other ones off, they're still obligated to love you. So working with your family is easy because at least, I've spent 34 years with my sister. I spent 34 years with my dad. So we all know how each other tick and how to work with each other. And so we're very lucky in that sense that, we don't have to worry about other people or, dealing with personalities we don't necessarily know because we all get along very well. So.
Well, with the expansion of the distillery, though, I mean, you've got this beautiful tasting room. You're just talking about. We took a little tour of the third floor, which is now barrel storage, and I'm thinking the whole time we're going around there, this is an amazing rickhouse. You've got the winds and the moisture. You're right on the bay here,
James River.
James River.
Yep.
Okay. You've got the heat on the change in temperature. I mean, talk about that. Was that just a fortuitous thing? Or because you love bourbon, you have a knowledge of it, but did you have essentially the understanding of what this was going to be for creating bourbon?
No, not at all. This is definitely this building was never built to be a distillery, but it turned out to be a perfect place to have a distillery. So when we started storing barrels here and we were tasting along the way, we noticed that there was kind of this little slightly salty brininess to them that was kind of coming through as like a salted caramel flavor. And I was thinking, that's got to be coming from the James River, which is a brackish water river, at least where it is down here. And of course the Virginia humidity and heat that we get for 8 months, 9 months a year. Is really beneficial as well. So it was not planned that this building turned out to be a good place to store barrels, but it worked out very well that it is.
Well, I'm curious now because you're starting to lay down all these barrels that are on the third floor, and they've only been up there a short time.
Yeah,
you were laying down. You had the barrel room here on the first floor. Just the change in temperatures and how these barrels, that'll be such a... Are you seeing that already?
So I'm actually running an experiment right now. So I have 2 sister barrels, both filled on the same day, both from the same cooperage. There's one on the first floor, one on the third floor. And so next year they both turn 4. So that's going to be the test. I'm going to crack them open the same day. And we're going to taste them to see how big of a difference the areas are. Because the first floor... Throughout the winter, it never drops below 55 degrees, which anything below 50 degrees, there's not really necessarily anything bad happening in the barrel, but there's nothing good happening either. Now, on the third floor, during the winters, it will definitely drop below 50 degrees. And for a couple days, it will. And for the most part, it'll get back up there, but we will have days where there's nothing happening in the barrel. So, although it gets substantially hotter in the summer. So, it's kind of going to be interesting to see if those days below 50 degrees are made up for with the days where it goes above 100, or the days that, it's just constantly above 55 degrees. So I'm really excited to see how that experiment works out between those two barrels, because
and you're going to have corners and airflow. I mean, you can open up the windows, close the windows. It's so technical that I almost feel like everything was supposed to work out in this building the way it does. It's like it's like the confluence, that serendipity of this was always screaming bourbon.
I was at Bardstown Bourbon Company a couple years ago, and I asked them, like, have you guys found a sweet spot for the barrels? And they go, yeah, those windows right there in that rick house. Every one of those barrels is going to be fantastic. And so I was like, oh, well, actually, I have all the barrels I have in the front corner. Those are windows. And I was like, oh, wait. Some of the barrels I pulled from there have been fantastic. I was like, that actually makes more sense. So, yeah, the windows up there are making kind of a sweet spot up there for the barrels. And on some of the stuff I just laid down a couple years ago, I made sure I was like, I'm going to put these right here so that they can be ready in 4+ years, that they're going to be sitting in direct sunlight the entire time, which is only going to increase the heat and make the bourbon that much better.
So I'm geeking out on this stuff because I'm thinking to myself, you're almost saying I can now dictate and control different barrel releases, different flavor profiles, just different ideas that you want to have by where you're now getting a chance to store those barrels.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the plan, is to just try to figure out where the best place for the barrels are and then continue to do that. So hopefully by the end of this year, we're actually doubling production, and we will remove all the barrels from the first floor going to the second and third floor. So it'll be interesting to see how much of a difference that will make of all the 15s that we do, which usually only go 14 to 16 months, and most of them are on the first floor, will now go their 14 to 16 months all up on the third floor, which will be interesting to see how much of a difference that makes for them.
I know you said in the beginning you were, working through a month to fill up a 53-gallon barrel. Where did the 15-gallon barrels come in? Was that something you always thought of, or did you say, wow, we need to start figuring out a way to get this out in the market quicker?
So the distillery we were modeled after is Kings County Distillery in Brooklyn. And so when we first started, we went up there because they started with the little 26-gallon Hillbilly stills as well. So we went up there to just see how they were operating. And by this point, when we went up there, they had gotten rid of all their 15-gallon or 26-gallon stills, and they had moved to 2 Vendome, I think they were 250-gallon pot stills. And so they kind of started with only doing 5s and 10s, and then eventually transitioned to only 53s. So our idea was, 15s would be the best way of getting a quality bourbon out the quickest. And kind of like them, we were only ever going to do bourbon. I mean, they do bourbon and rye, but they only do whiskey. So we were kind of following those same footsteps of we only ever wanted to make bourbon. So we kind of were figuring out how they were operating and following in their footsteps. And so doing 15s is a great way of getting out a quality product the quickest. But eventually we will kind of transfer into only 53s, but that's quite a years away because we still have so many producers that, so we do a lot of finished bourbons, and a lot of our producers that do the finishes with, that we do the finishes with, are very small. So like our hot honey guy could never fill a 53-gallon barrel of honey, of hot honey. So we have to continue doing those 15s to make sure that we can continue to have barrels for our guys that we do our finishes with, so that we make it easier on them, because our hot honey is one of our crowd favorites. All right, you
said that 3 times. What is hot honey?
So we have a habanero infused honey that is aged in our used bourbon barrels. So then they take that habanero infused honey out of the barrels, and we put our bourbon back in. So now we're picking up all those honey flavors, and then also picking up some of that capsaicin and habanero flavor to make a habanero-infused honey finished bourbon.
See, and this is one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you, because if you're not following Ironclad on social media, if you've never heard of them, and I have to tell you, you're doing an okay job of getting your name out here, but there are a lot of people who still don't know who you are. And when you find out what's going on here in this little part of Virginia, this is a destination you're going to want to come to, but you're going to be like, I'm just curious as to what the impressions that you've gotten for you and your family to the the feedback, the people when they come here and they try your bourbon, because it's almost the whiskeys and the bourbon, they almost have to kind of wipe their eyes and say, where are we? We're not in Tennessee. We're not in Kentucky. We're not in Indiana. Where are we? So with all that being said and long-winded and stuff like that, what is that? What's that feedback? What's that impression? What are those aha moments that you and your family have gotten that you kind of said, wow, holy cow, we're onto something?
I think for the most part, we try our best to. I really love bourbon, and I want to make sure that when you try our bourbon, that you love it as much as I do, because I think bourbon makes everyone happier, has a good time, and everyone loves a good bourbon cocktail, and so my idea is to just hopefully that when people try our bourbon, they taste the love I have for it, and to try, and when we get to do different things and different releases and different finishes, that we can kind of find something for even the person who's not a bourbon lover out there. So that's the kind of idea I have behind it. But as far as the grander scheme of things, the first drop of corn liquor distilled in the United States was in Jamestown. Oh, sorry, Berkeley Plantation, just north of Charles City here in Virginia. That was by George Thorpe, right? Thorpe, yeah.
There's Kara. She made it on the podcast.
So that was by George. It's in 1620. So that was by George Thorpe. So, and then the godfather of bourbon, Elijah Craig, he was born in Fairfax County, Virginia, and so his first distillation in Kentucky was 1783, and then Kentucky wasn't a state until 1792. So all those things happened when Kentucky was still Virginia. So I always like to tell them the birthplace of bourbon is right here in Virginia, because it is. So that's, although Virginia is not known as this bourbon state, but it was born here.
Bourbon's older brother is Virginia.
Yeah.
But it didn't become bourbon until it made it to Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
I see, this is one of the things, talking to you and just your wealth of knowledge, but you understand and respect the history. How did the name Iron Clad come in?
So we were trying to figure out a name for the distillery, because of course, that's a very important part of your distillery. And so we came up with a couple of different ideas. There was an original spelling of Newport News. We were trying to make sure we were tying in the history of where we were at. And we actually were up at the Mariners Museum, which has the turret of the Monitor, which was the original Ironclad ship. And we were talking to someone about telling them we were going to open a distillery down here. And they said, well, that had that building been there in 1862, they would have had a front row seat to watch the battle take place. And so then we're like, oh, we could actually call ourselves Ironclad. Like that's that one, you get the history of the area. And then on top of that, we are a very naval town, so you get that as well. And so it also just sounds really cool, Ironclad. So that was kind of the reason where we came up with the name Ironclad, because had this building been here in 1862, we would have front row seat to watch the battle take place between the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia. So you get a little history with your whiskey.
I love, but you do. You understand why Virginia is so impactful to our American-style whiskey, where it becomes bourbon. And you start here. You take that brief beginning of the journey, and you see what you're putting down into your barrels, into your bottles, and you really get a sense of the impact you're making on that whiskey history from your heritage and your lineage going back to the 1600s, right?
Yeah.
But I still don't want to lose sight of the fact that you guys had to start with these 26-gallon stills, right? But you had to get some feedback just beyond, we want to make good bourbon for ourselves. Where was it that you guys said you were on the right track? What was some of that feedback?
This goes back to kind of this story has two parts that was very beneficial to us. The first part was when we went to go to Kings County in Brooklyn. Colin Bourbon was there, who started Kings County, and he tried our bourbon, and it was very young, and it was our mash bill we're still using to this day, but it was not to this where it was at now. And he tried it and said, "This is very good." And it didn't seem like just like a kind of pat on the back, go on your merry way. It seemed like it was a genuine, this is very good. You guys are onto something. So all right, great. This guy's already successful with the distillery. he likes our bourbon. But at the same point, when he said that, my sister was there because she was living in New York at the time, and that was the point where she's like, I'm hopping on board with this, and I'm going to move down to Virginia, and I'm going to come work with you guys at the distillery. So it was beneficial for those two reasons. We got her, who's the marketing genius behind everything with Ironclad, and then also getting a stamp of approval from a distiller who knows what he's talking about to give us positive reinforcement to saying continue on with what you're doing.
Picture the day, or bring back the day that you opened to the public. What was for you, and realizing how far you had come, all the barrels you laid down, what was like that for you guys? So
we originally shipped up our bourbon to the ABC stores first, because in Virginia we have an ABC system, alcohol control state. So my sister and I, never doing this before, we drove up, I think it was 70 cases of bourbon to Virginia ABC warehouse in Richmond. And when they came to pick it up with the forklift out of the back of the truck, we were both getting misty-eyed, thinking like, this is like dropping your kids off at college. Like, go off into the world and don't screw this up. And so like, they unload it, they take it off into the warehouse, and we like, okay. And not really knowing exactly when it was going to make it out to stores. And then fast forward maybe 4 weeks, and we get a text from someone saying, hey, Ironclad's in the ABC store. We're like, okay, great. So we go up there, and I see it sitting on the shelf, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And very luckily, we had immediate success of people buying it. And so that was like immediately then we had to like, okay, now we need more bourbon to get to empty out barrels to go refill the next one.
Yeah, we got to go back to work now.
So like that was really good in the fact that we were very lucky that we already had a social media presence, that people were really excited to try Ironclad when we first released it. And then we were just running in ABC stores for 2 years, a year and a half before we opened up our tasting room here. And when we opened up the tasting room here, we had a soft opening where it was just friends and family and some investors. And then we had 2 weeks later our grand opening, and when we had our grand opening, it was still to this day one of the best days we've ever had as far as sales go, and that was a really beneficial. That makes you feel good when a lot of these people come out and are willing to wait in line and are willing to and give a lot of good feedback to saying they're really enjoying everything. So. Those are the nice things of positive reinforcement.
Let's do this. Let's taste some whiskey.
Okay.
Taste some of your bourbon. Cool. And we'll talk about the characteristics that you and Dad and your sister really, if you're going to drink bourbon for yourselves, this is what you want to drink. Let's talk about that.
Cool.
Bruskits. Beer, grain, dog bones, Bruskits. Your dog will go wild. Bruskits. Beer, grain, dog bones, a healthy alternative for your pup.
Bruskits are all natural and made in the USA. Visit Bruskit.com. That's BREWSCUID.com.
We are back, and we have these gorgeous looking glasses in front of us. Not just, the thought process of why this stemware and not Glencairn's.
So pretty much if you went to any distillery and you're doing tastings out of a barrel, more often than not, you're going to have this tulip-shaped glass, which is better for nosing and also better for tasting. I'm not a huge Glencairn guy. I think the glass itself is a little too heavy and wobbly. I actually like these a little bit better as for tasting glasses. To be honest, there's this bar in Chicago called Delilah's, and when they serve your, which is one of the greatest whiskey bars in the world. And when they serve your glass, it's, in a tiny little, it's almost like a Collins glass, but it's, shorter, and it's, the best glass to drink out of. It might not be clean because it's super dark, but it doesn't matter because you're in Delilah's and they're blasting punk rock, and it's fantastic. Anyway, that's a quick aside. But for the most part, if I'm drinking at home, I would not ever drink out of a Glencairn glass. I would actually prefer drinking out of like a rocks glass or something tulip like this.
Something larger or something you could nose better, really, and that's the thought process. And this is like talking to bourbon people, talking to whiskey people. You get such a different perspective. This is yours, but this is what you enjoy and how you enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
Right? And that was the first time I remember when we had started our journey that we were drinking out of glasses like this. And it was so even more interesting to the experience that we had here. So that was cool. Now, you've lined up. We've got 5 expressions here.
Yeah.
where should we start? What do you want to talk about first?
So we're going to start with the glass closest to you guys. This is our Monitor Blend bourbon. So our Monitor Blend, we call it that, named after the USS Monitor, first ever Ironclad ship. But also, we found this advertisement from the 1870s where there was a rye whiskey made in upstate New York called the Monitor Blend Rye Whiskey. And we, for the label on this bourbon, we recreated that old advertisement showing the monitor in the battle and everything like that. And so this bourbon came from, I was at, again, Bardstown Bourbon Company, and this is when they were first starting up. And they are a very open book there if anyone ever gets to get a tour there. And they were giving us samples of their White Dog, their different mash bills. And the one mash bill they tried us on was a very high wheated White Dog. And I loved it. It was the best White Dog I've ever had. So I took a picture of the recipe, of the percentages of everything. I came back home and I said, I'm recreating this one. And so I came back and I recreated that exact mash bill to make here.
So share the mash bill, or at least
so this one is 55% corn, 35% wheat, 10% malted barley. So this one is kind of like our bar-friendly bourbon because it's really good, neater on the rocks, also stands up really well in a cocktail. But it's also 86 proof, so it's more of a daily drinker and definitely one that you could just put out there. It's a little cheaper so that you can kind of use it for anything and not have to really worry about breaking the bank for a more expensive bottle.
It's interesting that you characterize that, because this is almost like, hey, this is a daily drinker, and maybe at a price point, but quality-wise, this is something that I think a lot of people would be really happy that this is like, you gave this to me for my birthday. I got this for our anniversary. My son was born. I'm going to put this bottle away. That's the quality. This is the first time we've had your spirits in 3 years.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is why we thought you guys were awesome. And it was only one taste. But the nose on this, I get a lot of that, the stone fruit. I get cherry. I get plum. And I get the grain on there as well, which I really, it's almost like a moist grain to the nose. But the nose is almost exactly the profile of the flavor and the taste and the palate. They're very consistent. Now, is that your personality? Is that Dad's personality for whiskey and what you're looking to do?
So, I mean, I like, if I had my way, all the bourbons would be cask strength. Because that's pretty much what I drink. But unfortunately, not the whole world drinks like I do. So this is kind of my way of making a bourbon that still made me happy, because I couldn't live with myself if I took a bourbon down to 80 proof. But this is kind of like my homage to Evan Williams Black Label, which is 86 proof. And so I like they make a really good bourbon that stands up well at 86 proof, and I wanted to make sure I could do the same thing. So that was the reason behind this one. Originally we wanted to take it to 92, and then we proofed it down a little bit more, and at 86 I was like, all right, this is still really good, and I'm happy with this. And so kind of everything I do, I kind of like, I don't have one that's 101 right now, but I really, on one of my next bigger releases, there'll be a 101 proof bourbon in homage to Wild Turkey, just because I think there's certain proofs where you see it and you immediately think of that certain bourbon. So like I see 86, I think of Evan Williams. When I see 101, I think of Wild Turkey. So this is kind of my way of just a tip of the hat to those bigger distilleries that have been making this fantastic bourbon consistently great for decades.
In talking to craft distillers, everybody wants to stand out on their own and make their own mark in the world. I would say this is the first conversation we've had with the distiller where you're saying, hey, it's almost like a cover band who now tours, or I even look at it, even a well-established band that'll cover another well-established band's song. That you really want to pay, as you said, homage. You're paying homage to the history, those that paved the way for you, and really saying, hey, this is my spin on what you've produced. Thank you for giving me this in my life. I want to pay a tribute to you, and this is how I'm paying it back.
Yeah.
And that's your inspiration.
Yeah.
Now, you said the mash bill on this was corn, wheat, and malted barley.
Yep.
There's no rye in this.
No rye in this
It is so... when I say so spicy, it is, to me, spicy without having any of that rye characteristic. There's this nice pepper finish. There's a little bit of the clove and cinnamon note to it. And is that really just coming off the proof of the whiskey? Yeah,
I'd say that's coming off the proof of the whiskey and then also the oak in the barrel. These are all done in these barrels that we got from a now defunct cooperage in South Carolina. But the barrels were actually really good. I don't know why. I do know why they didn't survive. But their cooperage was really good, and the flavors we were getting out of the barrels I loved, and they were all very cinnamon forward, which I really liked. And so I thought that, those spicy baking spice notes and cinnamon and all that was all coming from that barrel. And I thought they were actually really great of doing that. And I don't think it was intentional on their part, but it was sad. When they closed up, I was sad to see them go.
There's a point here where this becomes cream soda. Even to the texture in your mouth, it just lingers.
Yeah.
It's delicious.
Thank you.
Delicious. What's the next? I don't want to start because then they'll be finished. But what's the next one?
So the next one is our straight bourbon. So this is 3 years old, 100 proof. This is our 4-grain mash bill. So this is the 70, 10, 10, 10, 10. 70, 10, 10, 10. So this one is going to be more rye spice in this one because it's got that rye in there. This one's going to have more cherry to it. It's going to have a more cinnamon kick to it because this one is going to ramp up everything because it's a little higher proof. But this is the one I always drink the most of. This is the one I'm the most proud of. Because finally, when we finally put out a straight bourbon, it was like, okay, I finally waited 2 years to have this. And so now when I finally got to it, I was like, oh God, yes. And then this is the one I make sure every time I'm bottling that I'm really discerning every time I go through all the barrels to make sure that these two are going to blend well together. Because normally when we're doing a batch of straight, it's usually just about 2 barrels. So I want to make sure that these 2 barrels are going to go perfectly together, as opposed to our small batch, which is getting blended in with a whole bunch of other older barrels. So there's kind of more consistency of flavor. This one, every batch is going to be a little different because it's only 2 barrels going in together.
How has, from the beginning of when you were distilling and laying down barrels, how have things changed in the process? Yeast choice or just even grain selection, or have you kind of tweaked some of the mash bills?
So the mash bills, our 4-grain mash bill has been the same since day one. We've upped the amount of grain we put to water, just so we have a better yield. Our yeast has changed multiple times. Our yeast now comes from Firm Solutions, which is Wilderness Trails sister company, and we get 2 different yeast strains from them. And the reason for that is my favorite distillery outside of my own is Four Roses, and Four Roses has 2 different mash bills and 5 different yeast strains, essentially giving them 10 different bourbons. And I am completely envious of that because I think it's so cool that they can make 10 different bourbons from just changing 2 things. Every one of them is very unique and different. So I wanted to make sure that so my idea behind that was I found that Firm Solutions has different yeast strains, and they can tell you the taste, the taste that come with those yeasts. And so, these are the ones that I want to make sure I pair with what I'm already getting out of those particular bourbons to only kind of compound those flavors. So that was my idea behind using them. Originally, we started with another yeast that was what Kings County was using, and eventually, phased that out and eventually moved into Firm Solutions, who's doing just outstanding things with as far as enzymes, yeasts, all that stuff that you need to maximize yield and maximize the best flavors.
There is so much character in this bourbon. It really, for me, drinks like a 7-year-old bourbon. It really has that depth to it. There's the oakiness without being over oak. Mm-hmm. It's dry. You get that tannic finish to it. And then there's just so much of this fruity quality to this that just lingers and takes you through the whole sipping process.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I don't want to, we're like, cheerleaders for Iron Clad,
No, like I said, it's the one I drink the most of. It's the one I'm really proud of finally putting out older bourbon, and so this is what I've always been looking forward to when we first started, and we finally got there. And so it's there's little victories along the way of owning a distillery. So 2-year bourbon, great. We're finally putting out straight bourbon, awesome. And then last year was our first year we put out a bottle of bond. 4 years, we made it to 4 years. That's the next feather in your cap. And so I guess probably the next one after that is probably like 10 years. So got a while till we get there, but these little victories along the way just to keep you going and thinking, okay, great, putting out older stuff. This is tasting better. This is where we're going. This is where I want to be going. Those little victories along the way is what really makes you keep wanting to coming to work and looking at the barrels and saying you're getting there. You're getting there.
Yeah, because this is a business where you have to be patient because in your head where you want to be.
Yeah.
But you, like we said, you change your yeast strains, you work, you add more grain to the bill as the process as you go, and that stuff you get to do now because you're older, more established, and you keep wanting to see what that next product. I mean, that's the exciting part about what you get to do.
Yeah,
because it's like, all right, what's that next step we can take? I'm looking at that big third floor, and I'm wondering, are there any wild yeast strains that can be harvested or in and around the area? Like we met with Royce Neely in Kentucky, and he's harvesting he's doing a lot of wild ferments.
Yeah,
which he said, which was a great fun thing. Which he said he picked up from Dick Stoll out of Stolen Wolf.
I know,
but look how look how that works in the industry, right?
Yeah.
Now you're starting to say, all right, you've worked with this one yeast company, but now how about you come up with your own proprietary yeast strain that you can impact your own bourbons with or whiskeys with?
Yeah, I mean, that would be incredible. So, I mean, I know a lot of people who are cultivating their own yeast strains and things like that. That is well beyond my expertise or knowledge.
Right now.
But it's definitely something I would always be very interested in because I think that it's there's people out there who don't think yeast plays that much of a role in bourbon or fermentation. It's huge. I mean, it's definitely one of the biggest flavoring ingredients that you have in your fermentation. So I think without a doubt, that's definitely something that you should always care about when you're making something because that's where a majority of your flavor is coming from.
All right, speaking of flavor.
Okay, so next one. Of course, we're a craft distillery, so we do a lot of finishes. So this is our blueberry mead finish bourbon.
This is the one you just released. Sold out in like 3 minutes or something, I heard.
So it sold out in a day.
You had people camping out in front, I heard, in tents. This is like an iPhone release here.
I wish. But no, this was 126 bottles. Those were 375s. We did a 15-gallon barrel that we gave a barrel to a local meadery, Silver Hand, up in Williamsburg. And they made a blueberry mead and aged it in our used bourbon barrel. And so, they released the blueberry mead. It sold out in a week or something like that, which was, they thought very successful for them. Gave the barrel back to me, and we put our aged bourbon back in there and finished it for 10 months. And so when I was filling this barrel, one of my favorite smells in the distilling process or in the bourbon making process is when you fill a barrel. Like there's no greater smell of the white dog going into the charred oak, and you smell that coming off. It's just a fantastic smell. That's incredible. This one, the amount of blueberry and honey that was coming out of the barrel while we were putting the aged bourbon back in was absolutely intoxicating. No pun intended. And so this one, when we came out of the barrel, I was incredibly happy. I wanted to be a little bit more blueberry forward, but there's still a nice fruitiness to it, and there's still that kind of fermenty honey in there that adds the sweetness to the bourbon. And so I thought that worked out really well.
I am so thankful that you saved a little taste of this. I'm so disappointed there's not more. So I guess my question is there another barrel going to be floating around somewhere of this?
So the mead maker, I think there's probably a different term for that. But the guy who makes it has decided he got to try. He also wanted a bottle. He came in last week. Didn't have any left for him.
He didn't even get any.
He didn't even get one. And so he said, let's do a full batch this time. So a full batch would be, it would be around 75 gallons. And so we're going to do a full batch next time, which I was just emailing him before you guys got here. Just telling him, hey, just give me a heads up. I'll make sure I have the barrels ready, and we will rock and roll with this thing. So I thought it was too good to not do again. So I'm looking forward to. I mean, it's going to be unfortunately like 2 years away until we do it again, but I'm looking forward to it.
This is too good not to do all the time.
Yeah.
So I got blueberry pancake in the flavor profile. Mm-hmm. You get that little where you get the the sweetness of the bourbon, which you do get that essence of blueberry. So you like blueberry pancake, and then it just goes into grain. And because of the mead, you're getting a lot of the minerality or the herbaceousness of the honey that's going in there.
Yeah.
This is such a wonderful journey.
Yeah. No, when I got to taste it, I thought it was...
This is a treat, and I know
really
you
cool.
put on your social media. This is like one of a kind because nobody's ever done this.
I don't think so, at least. I mean,
It's
you
hard.
never know, but yeah.
But this is why craft is so valuable and important because you're starting to see these big producers now, doing a spin-off of just trying to do these craft styles, but to more of a massive audience, and they have the technology and the ability, but it's hard for them to sit around and wait for a little bit of that. You're here in Naval Town, right?
Yeah.
You don't just turn an aircraft carrier around. It's the same way you do like a little PT boat, right?
Yeah.
You guys are, hey, you want to do blueberry mead one day? Let's do that. You want to do hot honey? Let's do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, another thing I like to do is, I mean, how many times can you say you're the world's first? And so, I know that there are others now, but we were the first, I think, to ever do a hot honey finished bourbon. And so the next one I have, it could come out this year. It might come out next year, and it might not work. But we did a barbecue sauce finished bourbon.
Now that is from there. We just went there. So we were Redwood. So we had dinner there last night,
Nice.
And we saw your barrels there. And I'm like, how serendipitous is this? This is awesome. We were supposed to be here. So there was barbecue sauce in those barrels, and now you're going to take that and you're going to add bourbon to that.
Yeah. So they aged their barbecue sauce in our used bourbon barrels for a year. They took the barbecue sauce out. When I got the barrel back, I cleaned it out, put the bourbon back in, and we'll see how it turns out.
Okay. I mean, that's out there, but I can say, if I remember, there was a lot of cumin influence on their barbecue sauce, and I'm just, with what you're saying, how that, I'd never thought of cumin and bourbon, or that tomato and bourbon, or the acidity.
I think I think the tomato, which they put ketchup in there, so the sweetness could pair well. Where the whole thing, my idea is like it could just turn out to kind of be like a shrub cocktail because of the vinegar in there. So that's my only reason that I think it could work. We will find out.
So what's this next one I picked up while you were explaining bourbon and barbecue?
Yeah. So this next one is our old Colonel Bourbon. Our old Colonel Bourbon. So we found a farmer that was on the eastern shore of Virginia who bought this grain of corn, or this corn from this other farmer and they did a test on it, and they realized that it had been growing in Virginia since 1865. So that was really cool in the fact that that kind of coincides with our history, Battle of 1862, which was the Battle of the Mont and the Merrimack. And so this is the third different mash bill you've had now. Third different mash bill you've had. So this one is 78% corn, 10% rye, and 12% malted barley. I did this for the specific reason that I want you to taste the corn, but I don't want it to only be one noted corn. So that's why we brought the rye in for kind of balance. The corn itself is super naturally sweet. So, I heard the story, with every story of whiskey, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But when makers first started, they wanted to test their mash bill and to see how well it, made it into cornbread. And so the one mash bill they decided they liked was the one that had the wheat in it. So this one we did is we made a mash bill we made cornbread with just the corn. And we made a cornbread with just the wheat, or with corn and wheat. And then we made a mash bill with corn and rye. And the one we liked the best was the one with corn and rye. And we wanted it to be that the corn was the main component of the thing you tasted the most of, but I didn't want it to just taste like you're drinking cornbread. So this one's really cool. We mash it. It's kind of purple because it's got all these different colored grains in it, or different colored kernels. But this one we kept at 100 proof. This is almost 3 years old. This was in 30-gallon barrels as well. But this is the one I'm really excited about to see how time helps it, because it's only going to keep getting better and better. And I'm already really happy with it at what it's been now.
This doesn't drink like 100 proof?
Yeah. The sweetness of the corn really, really makes it super mellow. And I think it's so cool.
You get such a burst of sweet flavor. I'm almost thinking like if this were a lollipop.
Yeah.
You get that whole sugary corn, not corn syrup, but the corn essence of what you're putting in there. And then the rye, it doesn't spice it up as much as it, all of a sudden, it's almost like you drop off a ledge and you're just left with the spiciness, and it's such a quick ride.
Yeah.
But it's delicious. You talk about your barrels, and you talk about the different barrels you're using. I get a number. Is it a 4 char that's on all of these?
So these are all char 3.
These are all char 3.
But this is the one we've experimented the most with. We haven't released any of them yet, but we've used multiple different barrels for this one. So we have 3 or 4 barrels upstairs right now that are all the grooved barrels. So 75% of the barrel is char 3, 25% of the barrel is toasted. And then we've also got a char 1 of this going upstairs. And then there's another one that we did up there, but I can't remember. I'd have to look at the barrel. But yeah, so this is the one we're really experimenting to try multiple different things with it, because it's such a different corn than what yellow field corn number 2 is, that it's going to be really fun to try different things with it.
I really like how that barrel is just playing with that whiskey, that bourbon. It really, that's why I said it almost has, I want to say there's almost a Tennessee-esque whiskey out of that.
Yeah, it's just the corn is so sweet that it gives it this really nice sweetness. And yes, it is corn forward, which is, in my opinion, fine. But it's not it's not just only corn. So that's why I thought it was going to be really cool. So I was really excited.
That is cool. Look, you're like
my favorite.
You're like the freaking bourbon mad scientist right now. You are. I love what you're doing. You're humble too, aren't you?
No, it's fun to. I mean, like, one, we got to meet this guy, this farmer's, and his name's Bill Savage, and he's a riot, and so it's just really fun to meet these different farmers that are very passionate about their grains and that we can make bourbon out of. That's the fun part.
All right, there's one glass left. All
right, so this is a single barrel, 5-year bottled and bond. So this is the oldest bourbon we ever released. This was made on our 26-gallon stills. Obviously 100 proof because it's bottled and bond. And so this one, a little bit more malt forward than what previous ones have been. And it's so this, when I tasted this, it reminded me back of when we first tasted Iron Clad. So it's like, it tastes like what Iron Clad, when we first started, tasted like. And so it's very reminiscent of that because it's made on the old stills, made in the old style of the way we used to do it. Now we're so much more efficient. And Iron Clad has gotten, I think Iron Clad keeps getting better, But this was like a walk down memory lane of being like, okay, this is not necessarily where we started, but
it's coming full circle.
It tastes a more complex version of what we started with, which I thought was really cool. I mean, on top of that, it's old bourbon. We put out a 5-year bourbon, which was like great. It's finally we got it.
There's some nice malty. One of the things I just thought on. I know what you're doing, but this almost leaves me wanting to say, are you going to do a single malt here?
Yeah,
is it anything?
It's
because
so
this has
forward.
so much quality to that or characteristic to that.
Yeah.
But it still reminds you that it's not a single malt, that this is a bourbon.
Yeah.
This is a nice whiskey that, again, all these expressions, you get every bottle, you taste them through, and every one of them has a different experience.
Yeah.
And this is only 5 expressions out of the 35 you guys are doing now, right?
Basically, yeah.
What are some of those ideas, I mean, that you'd like to see or still that you haven't done, or some of the things you haven't released that are, almost there?
I don't think I've experimented enough with different barrel chars. Something we're actually going to start working on here in the next couple of months. Of a couple of different barrel chars. We've done a few. We've done toasted barrel finishes, which I really like. I should have put that as part of the tastings. I should have added that in there. But yeah, the one thing I'd like to do experiment more is with different char levels. As far as other things go, I have a port cask finish upstairs that's going to be maybe later this year or next year. I did a double. I just laid down a double oak this year, both char 3 and then char 3 again. So yeah, it's basically I drink all these things of different people's bourbons, and then I come back and think, well, I'd like to try that, and maybe I can try my hand and see how I can do at it. So. I'm constantly trying to figure out something that no one else has done, but at the same point, I also like to try my own hand at what someone else has done. So that's kind of my idea behind it.
You mentioned national distribution, or you and Kara were talking about that. Are these bottles that now you can get nationally distributed, or did you order them through your website? We
are very lucky. We got with Big Thirst Marketing, which we can go through our website. We can ship to 41 different states. Obviously the blueberry mead is not available. The bottled and bond is not available, but everything else you tried is. So you can go to our website and you can order that, and they'll ship right to your door if you're one of those 41 states. We are distributed a little bit on the East Coast. We've got Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and DC, and then obviously Virginia. So we're happy. We're a small distillery, so we kind of have to pick and choose where we want to distribute and how much we can distribute, so that we don't overextend ourselves. And so, bourbon's one of those weird industries that you always want your supply to outweigh your demand, because if your demand's always higher than your supply, you'll never put out old whiskey. There has to be a balance there to make sure you're controlling how much is going out and how much is staying in.
You mentioned supply and demand, and I'm just curious for you how supply chain issues and things have affected what you're doing right now.
So we did have to change bottle shape for a little bit during the couple years ago. It wasn't horrible. We did have to buy a few pallets of bottles, but we've now rectified that. We have a full order of a year's worth of bottles. So we have a full order, a year's worth of bottles that is here in the distillery. So yeah, we will be good to go for quite a while. That's still. And then on top of that, we gave our full order for barrels at the beginning of the year, so make sure that we were good on that. So there's supply chain issues constantly. You never know what's going to pop up. But for the most part, we got ahead of it at the right time, and we've been doing okay.
You guys are really smart.
Thanks.
I say that because, look, of what you're putting out, of recognizing to keep putting out what you're putting out, you have to always be thinking what the next step is going to be. We were talking upstairs. You've already, I think having whiskey clubs wanting to do single barrel releases and picking out their own barrels, does that surprise you does that stuff like surprise you that people are now seeking you out and saying, we want to purchase a whole barrel for ourselves?
Well,
and where do you see that in the industry? Because that's something that there's a conversation about. Do I want to open myself up just to start selling off these barrels because I want to make sure I have them for my overall consumers?
Yeah, so I really, like I said, I really love the bourbon industry. I by far my favorite spirit. Every Friday when I get home, you know, I play music, I sip of some bourbon, and I'm just completely relaxed. So I also have a lot of friends that are, you know, really like bourbon, and so we chat a lot about, you know, where we think the bourbon industry is going. And I think the very cool thing is that, yeah, there are a lot of single barrels out there available now. And the nice thing I find about single barrels is that, you know, getting allocated bourbon is very hard now. To find, you know, I can remember 5 years ago, I was trying to find a bottle of Virginia Distillery bourbon that I was trying to find that on a shelf. They didn't have it, so I had to just pick up a bottle of Elmer T. Lee. I was like, I didn't really want this, but I'll get this instead. So like now that would never happen. But these single barrels that a lot of these groups or these liquor stores are picking give you a chance of getting a better bourbon than what a lot of these allocated bourbons are. Now, there's a whole lot of caveats to that. The caveat number one being you don't know who picked that barrel, so they might have a completely different flavor profile, taste profile than you. I mean, if it is a distiller's pick that the distiller from the distillery picked, then you know, okay, you know that their flavor profile is mostly going to be on profile with what you get from the distillery. So I think I could be wrong about this, but I think that more and more people will be looking for single barrels because it's going to be a better, not necessarily a better bourbon, but a more gettable bourbon than what you could get for other things. So as far as people reaching out to us and doing single barrels, that makes me very happy knowing that there is a demand for that. Because I really love single barrels. I mean, it's one of the, if I go into a liquor store and they have a single barrel, more likely that's what I'm walking away with because I know it's unique to them and that there's probably, you know, if it's a cask strength, there's 150, maybe 200 bottles of it. That's rarer than anything else you can find out there on the shelf right now. So that's kind of where I think the bourbon industry is heading, is you'll see more and more single barrels, which is, I think, a good thing. But I think at the same point, I mean, not every single barrel is a home run.
Well, that's the key, right? I mean,
yeah,
you mentioned flavor profile. Just because, you know, you're a big fan of Iron Clad and you pick a single barrel, it doesn't mean it may be a little bit different.
I mean, yeah,
not necessarily better or worse, but different.
I mean, we can go full circle with this. And what I'm telling you in my experiment between the two barrels, the two sister barrels that are one's on the third floor, one's on the first floor, I anticipate those to taste very different, even though they're made on the same day, same mash bill, same cooperage. And so, you know, one person may love the barrel up on the third floor, one person may hate the barrel on the first floor. So it's just, you know.
That's what I'm saying. And as this distillery becomes more mature, where you're storing barrels.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to say to you, Owen, was this for the third floor, the second? Because was this on the left side corner or was this in the middle? How high was this stacked? Because eventually you're going to have to start stacking them a little higher than what you have now.
Yeah.
That could be the whole maturation of, you know, picking barrels or identifying those single barrels.
Yeah.
How do people find you?
So we are pretty prevalent on social media. We have an Instagram page, Ironclad Distillery, Facebook, Ironclad Distillery. We have our website, ironcladdistillery.com. But yeah, I mean, those are the best places to find us. You know, if you want to follow Ironclad, that's where we post pretty much everything we do.
You need to be following Ironclad, and if you are looking for amazing bourbon, you need to come here, and we need to come here more often because this way we'll get in line with the rest of those people camping out. Things you're creating, they're just sensational. I have to say, I've been looking forward to this ever since we set this up. I'm grateful for your time. This has been a treat. This has exceeded my expectations. I forgot, and I'm sorry I did. I forgot how amazing your bourbons and spirits are.
Thank you.
So thank you for what you and Stephen, what Stephen and you and Kara are doing all the time, and the staff here, this area in Virginia is blessed to have you guys here. And you're carrying on the history, the lineage of bourbon, whiskey, and really allowing people to understand that this is something that is a treat to be savored. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Owen.